Good morning, all, from beautiful Royal Oak in suburban Detroit. I am hoping that you're safe and sound this morning and not too crazy. It's a little crazy for all of us right now, of course, but we're moving on. And speaking of moving on, here we go with Maylone's first online lecture. I'm going to keep it kind of short, hopefully 10 minutes. For one thing, I want to make sure it's uploadable without any big hassle. And I want to hear from all of you, or for some of you, that you indeed are able to view it, and we'll go from there. We have taken a look at traditional testing. You've all done a good job with handling that, and a little bit of alternative assessment as well. We cut that a bit short because of the situation right now. But let's move on to the big tests, those tests that you don't write, that you have to give, whether you like it or not. And I know that tone probably gives away my feeling about standardized tests. And of course, you've read, or should have read, my Test Think article, which goes even further in terms of showing my attitude. But that's here nor there, because we're not in charge, are we? You will likely have to administer and be involved with standardized testing, whether you end up in a public or private school, almost any grade level. So we need to take a look at standardized testing. And today, just an introduction. You'll need for this lecture to bring up on your computer or whatever you're using to view this, the characteristics of standardized test document, a one-pager that I sent you by email. So if you would please pause if needed and bring that up. Let's start by simply looking at the characteristics of these big tests and go through each bullet point here quickly. Sort of provides a definition of standardized tests. First of all, standardized tests are given to many. I put many in quotes in the document because there's no definition, no cut as to how many students it takes for a test to be called standardized. But certainly your Friday spelling quiz, no matter how wonderful, and of course it would be wonderful because you took Maylone back at Eastern for EDPS, no matter how wonderful that test is not standardized. Even if it's given school-wide, district-wide, not standardized. We'll see why in a couple of minutes here. Typically, these tests are written by professional test writers, often folks called psychometricians in my business, sometimes simply called psychos for short. Not necessarily by teachers, and that's of some concern, as we'll see as we move on. As I'm sure you know from vast personal experience, these tests are typically multiple choice. Sometimes binary, but binary, as you know, is really just a form of multiple choice. Often there are, or sometimes there are writing prompts included, not extensive because they're expensive. That almost sounds like a bumper sticker. Not extensive because they're expensive. Multiple choice items, of course, can be graded, so to speak, by a computer or a machine. We generally use the generic term improperly, Scantron. Scantron is actually a brand of grading machines. But hiring people to read essay responses is really, really vastly expensive, and so that's one reason you don't see a whole lot of that. Going down our list here, standardized tests are often timed. That has loosened up a bit over the years, certainly in my career, with the recognition by some of these folks that a test should not be a test of speed. Now, there needs to be practical limits, of course. If most students can do a test in, say, 45 minutes, you can't allow 6 hours for Dwayne to finish up. But there is the built-in pressure of time that's inherent in almost all tests. This next one's really important. Standardized tests cover a phantom curriculum. When you give a test in your classroom, you know that you are checking on what you, quote, covered. And you could, if pressed, hopefully, specify the standards, outcomes, SWBATs that your test covers. Not so much with standardized tests. Because they're often administered nationwide, there is really no way that they can have a tightly specified curriculum or domain, if you remember that term. This is because the curriculum in California is not identical to the curriculum in Michigan or the curriculum in Alabama. Of course, there's huge similarities. The Pythagorean theorem is the Pythagorean theorem no matter what state you live in, and that's certainly covered in basic math classes. But you can't cover, for instance, local history on a standardized test. Social studies topics are given different emphases state by state. I think there's still some southern states really sore about the outcome of the Civil War. And you get a little different flavor sometimes in textbooks in the South. My point is, you can't have a single curriculum that covers, that can be specified. And so, and this is nearly a verbatim quote from standardized tests like the ACT and SAT from their websites, we just cover things that 11th graders ought to know. Now, again, they don't say that exactly, but that's sort of the tone, and you can see why that is the way it is. I've harped in class about getting results of assessments back to students quickly, really quickly. It's important. Doesn't always happen that way with standardized tests. Now, we're in better shape than we were when I was a young teacher. Sometimes it would take months to get the old MEP scores back and other test scores back. Things are a little better in the digital age now, but you might still wait weeks, which of course makes the data a little bit less helpful. You'll notice that the last characteristic in my list is bold, and that's on purpose, because this is really where we get the definition of standardized tests. Standardized tests are not called that just because their administration is standardized, meaning that the proctor, the person administering the test, gives the same instructions to students regardless of what state they're in. The tests may be exactly the same across the country. So that sounds like where standardized comes from, but it's not. Standardized tests are called that because scores are ranks, and the score distribution tends to be the bell curve, sometimes called the standard curve, sometimes called the normal curve, and that's guaranteed. We're going to talk about that last one more in another mini lecture to follow. But just be aware that when a student gets a score, it's not like Dwayne getting an 88 in your classroom on the Civil War unit, meaning he's roughly at the 88% mastery level of the domain. That's not how standardized test scores work. Standardized test scores always tell you, the student, where you rank compared to other students. Now, this is important, it's crucial, it's profound, and it's provocative. One more thing to close this mini lecture. You'll notice a little technical note at the bottom. Two terms I'd like you to know. They're widely used in education circles. Standardized tests are referred to sometimes as norm reference tests, meaning your scores are always compared to what is typical or normal. As I say, your score is always a rank, not an indication of your mastery of any domain. So you need to know that term. Norm referenced goes with standardized tests. Your classroom tests, which we've looked at for over 2 months, they're sometimes called criterion reference tests for a simple reason. The tests are checking on specific criteria. That is, it's known ahead of time by the students and everyone exactly what the test is covering, mainly the domain, the unit, the standards, the outcomes, the stuff that you intended to cover in your classroom. So you need to know those two terms. I'm going to cut right here, and we'll see if this first stab was helpful or even successful. No homework attached at this point with this lecture, and I say, as I often do, stay tuned. Thank you.